victims. The Kingdom of Bahrain wishes India a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Bangladesh.
I call on Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bangladesh thanks the distinguished delegation of India for its comprehensive presentation. We congratulate India for its remarkable achievements in ensuring universal access to affordable health care and free education to children, improving nutrition, poverty eradication, despite the COVID-related challenges. We are happy to note Indian emphasis on equality and non-discrimination and its legislative initiatives to address human trafficking. We are confident and we expect that the Indian human rights situation will continue to match its democratic credentials. In this spirit, Bangladesh recommends India to intensify its efforts in implementing its comprehensive policies to ensure quality education for all children and improve access to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation. We wish India a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. Belarus.
I call on Belarus.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the distinguished delegation of India and we thank them for the presentation of the substantive national report. We note the broad range of human rights obligations of India and the significant progress achieved by the government to implement them. In particular, there has been improvement of legislation as well as better protection for vulnerable categories of the population and better access to education and medical services. We welcome the government's efforts and the specific outcomes achieved linked to the social security system population and efforts made to reduce violence against girls and children and more effective ways of fighting human trafficking. In the spirit of our constructive partnership, we would like to recommend the following: to continue work towards joining the international instruments in the field of human rights and to ratify them. We wish India every success. Thank you.
Thank you. Belgica.
We are convinced that further progress can be achieved. Belgium welcomes the delegation of India and appreciates India's efforts in addressing violence against women. We are convinced that further progress can be achieved to address gender-based violence and support human rights defenders. Therefore, Belgium recommends India to 1. Remove the exception related to marital rape from the definition of rape in Section 375 of the Indian Penal Code. 2. Repeal or amend the Foreign Contribution Act 2020 to ensure the right to freedom of association in line with the ICCPR. 3. Repeal or revise the Penal Code as well as the Unlawful Activities Act to ensure the right to freedom of expression in conformity with the ICCPR. 4. Withdraw the Armed Forces Act 1958 and 1990 from the districts where it remains fully or partially in jurisdiction. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Benin.
I call on Benin. We thank India for presenting its national report, which highlights meaningful progress in human rights since the previous UPR cycle. Our delegation also hails progress in good governance, fighting poverty and environmental protection. Our recommendations: 1. Strengthen the combat against human trafficking and slavery. 2. Ratify the Convention Against Torture and its optional protocol. 3. Ratify the 2 optional protocols to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Benin wishes India every success in the review. Thank you. Thank you. I call on Bhutan.
Bhutan welcomes the concrete efforts made by India in implementing its human rights obligations, particularly those guided by its developmental agenda. Bhutan also welcomes the measure to mitigate the impact of the pandemic and applaud India's generosity in donating COVID vaccines to many countries during the crisis. Bhutan commends India's policy initiatives to address poverty through various poverty alleviation measures. We also note the measures taken such as amendment of the criminal law on sexual harassment, increased penalty for rape of girl child, and the setting up of health centers for victims of sexual offences. We recommend the following: 1. To continue its efforts in addressing rural poverty, and 2. Take further steps to combat sexual offence against women and children. We wish India every success in its review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Botswana.
I call on Botswana.
Mr. President, We welcome the delegation of the Republic of India to the fourth cycle of the UPR process and thank them for their comprehensive national report. We note with appreciation that India supported both our recommendations submitted during their last review, which were to take all appropriate measures in the implementation of the 2015 Juvenile Justice Act to give children aged 18 years and below an opportunity for rehabilitation and to ratify the Convention Against Torture. However, we take note that the consideration of the latter remains outstanding. In that regard, Botswana recommends that India ratifies the optional protocol on the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 2. Ensures universal health care coverage and access for all persons with disabilities in rural and urban areas. We wish India a successful UPR outcome. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Brazil tiene la palabra.
Brazil has the floor.
Thank you. Brazil welcomes the delegation of India to the fourth cycle of the UPR. We appreciate India's commitments to seeking universal access to affordable health care for all, and in particular India's sense of responsibility and solidarity by sharing COVID vaccines and response products to more than 150 countries. We commend India for aligning the national voluntary guidelines on socio-economic and environmental responsibility of business with the UN principles and the SDGs. With the spirit of constructive dialogue, Brazil recommends India to strengthen efforts to implement labor laws, especially concerning informal workers and women workers, and to consider adopting regulations on the protection of persons that ensure the rights of freedom and expression and privacy in accordance with the existing international standards. We wish India a successful review.
Thank you. Brunei.
I call on Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brunei thanks India for the presentation and welcomes the steps taken in implementing recommendations from the previous cycle. In particular, we commend India's commitment in the area of adequate housing through programs such as the NULM and Smart Cities Mission, which has reduced poverty and enabled its people to access gainful self-employment and skilled wage employment opportunities. However, we note with concern on the report of attacks on minority communities and instances of religious intolerance, violence, and discrimination. Mr. President, Brunei proposes the following recommendations. 1. To continue implementing various schemes and measures to ensure inclusive access to adequate housing and basic amenities. And 2. Prioritize efforts to ensure that persons with disabilities are afforded the same right to education as all. We wish India a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. Bulgaria.
I call on Bulgaria.
Thank you, President. Bulgaria warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of India. We appreciate the reinforcement of the constitutional principles of equality and non-discrimination through various legislative, institutional and policy measures after the third UPR cycle. Bulgaria applauds the successful implementation of poverty alleviation programs by the Indian government and commends India's progress in providing access to affordable health care for all and ensuring free and compulsory education for all children in the age of 6 to 14 years. We would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Take further measures to promote women's participation in the workforce, including through equal pay, skills development, job retention during pregnancy and maternity, and return to work opportunities after maternity. 2. Complete the review process to bring the legislation, policies, and schemes for the protection of the rights of persons with disabilities in line with the provisions of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We wish the delegation of India a successful review. Gracias, Presidente.
Gracias, Embajador.
Thank you, Ambassador. Burkina Faso has the floor by video. Thank you. We bid a warm welcome to the Indian delegation and thank it for presenting its national report. We applaud India's efforts to implement recommendations accepted during the previous UPR cycle, which have led to a drop in maternal mortality from 122 to 103 per 100,000 live births by 2019. Whilst we encourage India to pursue its efforts and in a spirit of constructive dialogue, we have the following recommendations. 1. To ensure access to water and sanitation services on an equal footing regardless of the place or status of residence. And 2. Strive to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to public services in an inclusive and non-discriminatory fashion, particularly in rural areas. We wish India a successful review. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Burundi. Thank you, President. The Burundian delegation welcomes the Indian delegation and congratulates it on accepted recommendations. We appreciate India's determination to promote human rights in all spheres of life. We recommend the following. 1. To pursue these efforts to improve the environment, take measures to promote access to free education and health for all, free education and affordable health for all. We wish India every success. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I call on Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cambodia recognizes India's ongoing efforts to review legislation and to undertake legal reforms in line with its commitment to international human rights obligations. Cambodia commends measures taken by India to implement recommendations in the adoption of its third UPR cycle. In the constructive spirit, Cambodia would like to put forward 2 recommendations. 1. Continue efforts and measures to increase safe and sustainable drinking water in rural areas and to improve sanitation coverage, especially for indigenous community and most vulnerable groups. 2. Continue effort to promote women's rights and to eliminate violence against women and girls through effective legislation and law enforcement measures. I wish the delegation of India every success in this review. I thank you.
Thank you. Cameroon.
I call on Cameroon. Thank you, President. The delegation of Cameroon congratulates India for its brilliant and informative report to the 41st session of the UPR. India has made a lot of progress. It's definitely on the up. We have the following recommendations. 1. To grant the highest level of priority to women's safety by making a commitment to eradicate all forms of discrimination against women and promoting their empowerment. 2. Pursue efforts to protect children from sexual exploitation, corporal punishment, child marriage and labour, and support victims of sexual crimes. 3. Pursue the protection of persons with disabilities. And 4. Continue efforts to integrate scheduled castes and tribes into the development process. We wish you every success in implementing the recommendations accepted. Thank you. I call on Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Canada welcomes the steps taken by India to improve economic and social rights for all, including women and girls. Canada recommends that India, 1, improve the enforcement of laws relating to sexual violence, investigating all acts of sexual violence, providing training to law enforcement officials on effective interventions, and expanding the definition of rape and sexual assault to include marital rape. Number 2, to protect freedom of religion by investigating all cases of religious violence and discrimination on religious grounds, including against Muslims, condemning these cases and sensitizing the public on religious tolerance. 3, strengthen media freedom by ensuring that all legislation, including the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, is compliant with India's international obligations under human rights law. And 4, address violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Thank you.
Gracias. Chile.
Thank you. I call on Chile. Thank you, President. We bid a cordial welcome to the Indian delegation and thank it for presenting its national report. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1. Work towards ratifying the Convention Against Torture. 2. Consider taking measures to establish a moratorium on the death penalty, which will lead to its abolition. 3. Study measures to reduce discrimination against women, including training of law enforcement officers in protecting the victims of sexual violence. Lastly, we recognise India's progress towards equality and non-discrimination. We wish India every success in this 4th cycle of the UPR. Thank you. I call on China.
主席先生。
Thank you, President. The Chinese delegation has 3 recommendations. Firstly, continue to promote
Geneva, United Nations की Human Rights Council दा India की Universal Periodic Review मरीरक सुबह इना review तो उसे सा कोई participate तो जरी कोई तोम जीवी ना मसीबू live telecast तो बिनी है ना higher process दा कोई हाइनिंग आने तना अगर को फंडोक चरी Universal Periodic Review है बिसे chahi mari makhai khudingi leibak amamamgi leidiba human rights situation se atopa malemgi leibak mayam amuna review tawuni aduna mayam punamak India gi review mari suba tawu se da mai tawi haidu unna yenginasi
Thank you. Congo tiene la palabra.
Congo welcomes the Indian delegation and congratulates it on the presentation of its national report. India has made a number of efforts to promote and protect human rights since the last cycle. Meaningful progress has been made in economic and social rights in particular, and especially when it comes to health and education. Furthermore, my country applauds India's commitment to human rights thanks to its funding of the Office of the High Commissioner. We have the constructive recommendations as follows: to fight against debt servitude by rigorously applying the 2016 law prohibiting it, to ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment. Lastly, Congo wishes India every success in its UPR. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Costa Rica has the floor. Thank you very much, President. Costa Rica thanks India for presenting its national report, and we have the following recommendations. 1. Adopt a legal definition from the WHO on female genital mutilation, criminalise it, and implement a national plan to eradicate it. 2. Establish 18 as the minimum age for marriage throughout the country. 3. Develop an action plan to eradicate all forms of discrimination against Dalits and promote their integration in the private and public labour markets. Promote the right to a clean, healthy environment in the Constitution. Ensure freedom of expression and remove obstacles to accessing information online. To extend the coverage of supplies of drinking water and sanitation. Thank you. Thank you. Côte d'Ivoire has the floor. I'm not sure if you're on Zoom or in the room. Thank you, President. Côte d'Ivoire thanks the Indian delegation for presenting its national report. We congratulate India on its activities to promote human rights through training provided to civil servants in human rights in general, and in particular on collective rights. We encourage the Indian authorities to pursue their efforts, and we have the following recommendations. 1. Ratify the Convention on the Status of Refugees, and to speed up the prosecution of violence against women and have a health sector response to gender-based violence at all levels. Côte d'Ivoire wishes India every success in the review. Thank you. I call on Croatia.
Mr. President, Croatia welcomes the delegation of India and thanks them for their report. We welcome the government's efforts in improving overall human rights situation in the country. However, we are concerned about the use of death penalty in recent years. We encourage the government to take steps towards the moratorium on the use of death penalty and to ensure the respect of international standards that provide safeguards guaranteeing protection of the rights of those facing the death penalty. We have 3 recommendations. 1. Address structural disadvantages faced by marginalized communities in accessing education, including Christian community. 2. Decriminalize defamation and libel and strengthen an independent broadcast media authority. 3. Ratify the 2nd optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, aiming at the abolition of the death penalty. We wish the delegation of India a successful review session. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Cuba tiene la palabra.
Cuba is recognized. Thank you very much, Mr. President. We would like to extend a warm welcome to the delegation of India and to thank them for the presentation of the report. We acknowledge their commitment to the UPR review. We would like to recommend, first, continue making efforts in the effective implementation of the General Plan on the Rights of the Elderly, so as to ensure their well-being and their rights. 2. To continue to strengthen the legal framework as well as public policies to mitigate poverty with a view to eradicating it, and along those lines to continue to give priority to the most vulnerable groups. We wish India every success in this review. Thank you.
Gracias. Chipre.
Thank you. Cyprus has the floor.
Mr. President, Cyprus welcomes the distinguished delegation from India and for the presentation of its report. Cyprus commends India for progress made since the last UPR cycle, including significant strides in poverty reduction. The Supreme Court's 2018 decriminalization of consensual adult same-sex relationship was a major step in mitigating discrimination. Cyprus wishes to recommend ratify the first and second optional protocols to the ICCPR and the optional protocol to the ICESCR. Enhance legal provisions combating discrimination against women and girls. Continue efforts to effectively enforce environmental policies. Organize campaigns and educational programs to raise awareness of the importance of cultural heritage in all its diversity. I thank you.
Thank you. República Checa.
Thank you. The Czech Republic has the floor.
The Czech Republic welcomes the delegation of India and appreciates the improvement of legal provisions upholding women's rights. We wish to recommend to recognize domestic workers in India's 4 labor codes and recognize their right to collective social security benefits. To introduce comprehensive sex education in the Indian school curriculum to increase the students' awareness, train teachers, and prepare information materials for families. To repeal the crimes of sedition and criminal defamation in the Indian Penal Code in order to be in line with international standards on freedom of expression. To enact and implement domestic legislation on the rights of persons belonging to national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities. Finally, to guarantee freedom of expression and carry out independent investigation of all cases of attacks on journalists, including arbitrary detention and intimidation, especially in Jammu and Kashmir. We wish India a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. Último orador.
Thank you. And our last speaker is the Gambia. Through a video statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of the Gambia warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of India and thank them for their continued and constructive engagement with the UPR mechanism. Mr. President, the Gambia welcomes and takes note that the Constitution of India guarantees free and compulsory education of all children between the ages of 6 to 14 as a fundamental right. We equally take note and welcomes India's efforts towards ensuring that persons with disabilities are better protected to promote more inclusivity. Mr. President, while recognizing the efforts being put in place by the Government of India towards child protection, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations. 1. For India to strengthen its laws and implementation structure at all levels to eradicate all forms of child labor, child trafficking, and domestic violence against children. For India to ensure that the justice system is responsive to women and disabilities and guaranteed their rights for privacy and safety, and I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks. Now we would like to give the floor to the Indian delegation for its final comments. Thank you.
Mr. President, Excellencies and distinguished delegates, let me take this opportunity to thank you all for your participation in India's 4th UPR. We have heard and taken careful note of your comments, queries, and recommendations. I have already responded to some of the issues raised by the member states during my previous intervention. I'll try to respond to as many remaining issues as possible within the limited time available. So far as the question concerning torture or enforced disappearance is concerned, let me underline that India condemns any form of torture and maintains an inviolable stand against arbitrary detention, torture, rape, or sexual violence by anyone. The Constitution of India guarantees to every person the right to life and personal liberty, which the Supreme Court of India has interpreted to include the right to live with dignity. India is a signatory to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, as well as International Convention for the Protection of all persons from enforced disappearances, and remains committed to ratifying the conventions. The 273rd report of the Law Commission of India has provided its recommendations on the implementation of convention along with the draft Prevention of Torture Bill. Since the subject falls under the concurrent list under our Constitution, the central government needs to take into account the opinion of states in this regard. The recommendation and the draft have been circulated to all the state governments and Union territories for their comments. Further, the existing legal framework in India, such as provisions under the Constitution, Indian Penal Code, the Code of Criminal Procedure, among others, guarantees adequate protection against any form of arbitrary detention, torture, and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. As remedial measure against torture, courts in India have recognized victims' compensation, and in some instances, courts and the National Human Rights Commission have even directed payment of compensation, to which the state has duly complied. As regards the freedom of speech and opinion is concerned, the Constitution of India guarantees to every citizen the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression. Like any other freedom, the freedom of speech and expression is not absolute in nature and is subject to reasonable restrictions in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with the foreign state, public order, decency or morality, contempt of court, defamation, or incitement to an offence. As is evident, these restrictions are conceived to protect national and public interest and are required to meet a very high threshold. They are in consonance with Article 19, Sub-Article 3 of ICCPR. Being a fundamental right, any restriction imposed is amenable to judicial review by the constitutional courts in India, including by directly approaching the Supreme Court of India. Imposing reasonable restrictions enables the state to regulate freedom of speech and expression when it amounts to hate speech or leads to incitement to an offence. Nevertheless, it is a settled law in India that any restriction imposed must not be excessive or disproportionate. For instance, the Supreme Court in Shreya Singhal versus Union of India in the year 2015 struck down Section 66A of the Information Technology Act 2000 as vague, unconstitutional, and imposing unreasonable restriction on the freedom of speech and expression. So far as the Citizenship Amendment Act CAA 2019 is concerned, it is a limited and focused legislation which reaffirms India's commitment to the welfare of persecuted minorities in the region. This is similar to laws that exist elsewhere in defining specific criteria for citizenship pathways. The criteria defined here is specific to India and its neighborhood and takes into account the historical context and the current ground realities. It is aimed at enabling foreigners of 6 minority communities, namely Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, and Christian community from 3 specified neighboring countries who have migrated to India owing to their religious persecution in those countries to obtain Indian citizenship. It will help in reducing their statelessness and would enable beneficiaries to have a more secured and dignified life. This act neither takes away citizenship of any Indian citizen, nor amends nor abridges any existing process for acquiring Indian citizenship by any foreigner of any country belonging to any faith or religion. So far as legislations concerning anti-terrorism and national security laws like UAPA are concerned, I would like to begin by saying that we have been facing terrorism from several decades. The state has a responsibility to protect its own citizens against the terrorist acts. We have enacted legislations like Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, Armed Forces within bracket Special Powers (over) Act, National Security Act to deal with the menace of terrorism and to protect the sovereignty, unity and integrity of India. These legislations have been enacted to secure a balance between the liberty of citizens and the security of the state. They have adequate safeguards inbuilt against any potential misuse. Operation of Armed Forces Special Powers Act is periodically reviewed by the Government of India after consultation with the state government concerned and the central agencies based upon the ground situation. Due to the improved security situation, the said act was withdrawn completely from the state of Tripura in May 2015, from the state of Meghalaya in April 2018. Further, in April 2022, it was withdrawn from 23 districts in Assam, partially from 7 districts in Nagaland and 6 districts in Manipur. These decisions are taken based upon the prevailing circumstances in each of the disturbed areas in order to protect the rights of the citizens. Mr. President, Excellencies, and distinguished delegates, there were also observations, comments, and recommendations related to key economic, social, and cultural rights. India attaches high importance to implementation of these rights. Besides my opening remarks, brief statements made by representatives of various ministries of the Government of India have outlined the initiatives that we have taken to fulfill our obligations in respect of these rights, including our success in meeting sustainable development goals and creating an inclusive economy and society. Mr. President, our participation in UPR has been informed by our democratic spirit. My delegation from different ministries and departments of the government will be returning with renewed commitment and new ideas for further strengthening our institutional, legislative, and administrative framework for better protection and promotion of human rights of our people. We are aware of the challenges but remain steadfast to realize this goal. I thank you for your participation and kind attention. I now invite our Vice Minister, Ministry of External Affairs, Mr. Sanjay Verma, for our closing remarks.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the delegation of India, I sincerely thank you for your constructive participation and engagement in our Universal Periodic Review. It is encouraging that a large number of member states took to the floor today. We found the entire exercise of preparation for and participation in the UPR useful. We have tried to respond to as many issues raised as possible within the limited time frame. We are thankful for your observations as well as recommendations. We will duly reflect on them in consultation with various stakeholders, including civil society organizations. We value your comments and recommendations, which should undoubtedly be taken into consideration by my government in delineating the next steps for further advancing the goal of protection of human rights of our people. India remains deeply committed to multilateralism, the UN Charter and its founding principles. In our tenure as a member of the Security Council, which comes to an end this year, we have acted as a bridge on some serious but divisive issues confronting the Council. As we begin the G20 presidency next month, we are sensitive to the challenges faced by developing countries. India will work with other G20 members to address serious issues of debt, of economic growth, food and energy security, and particularly of environment. The reform of governance of multilateral financial institutions will continue to be one of our core priorities. Let me conclude by reiterating that the Government of India's abiding commitment is for the promotion and protection of human rights of our people, including providing good governance and realizing the inclusive and sustainable development for the welfare of our people. As an ancient civilization which is reclaiming prominence, India suggests that diversity can coexist and prosper together. As the world's largest democracy, India is committed to the highest standards of human rights. Unlike my colleague from the UK, we have absolutely no reason today to refer to cricket, but I thank you again for participating in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank especially the delegation of India for all the work the important high-level delegation that was here with us today. In the case of India being such an important country in size and population, as you said, a universal system that has a tool like this to address the human rights situation of such a big and populous country is indeed a very important tool for the world. So we thank the Indian delegation and also all the organizations in the country that I'm sure participated in the report and the follow-up of the recommendations. So agradezco la presentación.
I thank the delegation for the presentation and participation in the video. The report will be prepared by the Troika, namely the representatives of Nepal, the Netherlands, and Sudan. In accordance with the procedure implemented since 2015, the recommendations section is scheduled for distribution on Monday, the 14th of November at 6 p.m. And it will be considered for adoption on Wednesday, November 16th as of 3:30 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by email on Friday, November 25th, 2022. This brings us to the end of our meeting. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the review of Algeria. Speaking time will be 55 seconds for all. Inscribed speakers who wish to withdraw from the list are kindly invited to inform the Secretariat at least 30 minutes before the start of the review. I hereby close the 8th meeting of the 41st UPR Working Group session.